Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Miller,
And I'm Ms. Metter.
and we are here to answer the question, what is life? As you look at living things like butterflies, turtles, and so forth, what are the characteristics that each of them possess that we call alive?
Living things are called organisms. Maybe, there we go. So a lemur is an organism, a butterfly is an organism, a turtle, and this one, Mr. Miller, what's that one?
That one's called Daphnia, or more commonly known as the water flea, found in our lakes and ponds. And what's this thing down here, Ms. Metter?
Is that yeast or is it bacteria?
It looks like yeast budding to me.
Okay. The first characteristic of life that we're going to look at is cells. All living things are made of cells, and cells are highly organized structures.
If you take a look, for example, at this person's arm, one of the things we can see is that the upper surface or epidermis is made of many flattened cells.
And the same is true with an onion. Plants, as well as animals, are made of cells.
Now, animal cells, and we often see diagrams like this, but here's an electron microscope photograph of an animal cell, and most of you are familiar with the cell membrane that forms the boundary of the cell, and it has cytoplasm, and this larger staining structure is called the nucleus. There's quite a few other structures inside an animal cell that we'll talk about later, but for now we realize they are very complex structures.
And the same is true with plant cells. They are highly organized. They have specific parts that do specific functions.
And if you look at this diagram shows if you look at a blow up of a cell membrane, you'll see that it's very involved here with a lipid bilayer and proteins, all that do many jobs that we'll get into as the year goes on.
An organism that is made up of just one cell is called unicellular. And this picture shows a paramecium, which is a little protist, which is unicellular. It's found in fresh water. Also, we have here on the left diatoms, and diatoms are actually my favorite unicellular organism because they're so pretty. When you look at them under the microscope, they have glass shells and they are gorgeous. And on the right here, these are bacteria. These are spherical shaped bacteria, and they are also unicellular.
And if you've ever had strep throat, Streptococcus bacteria are this shape of bacteria. This particular type, though, is called Staphylococcus. Ever heard of a staph infection? Some creatures, like ourselves, are multicellular, and of course, that means they're made of more than one cell that makes up the entire organism. So this leopard, this sponge, and this flower are all multicellular creatures.
Our second characteristic of life is homeostasis, and this means staying the same on the inside, and that means a stable internal conditions. The roots for this word are homeo, which means same, and stasis, which means state.
This is why organisms do respond to stimuli, because we try to maintain an internal stability. For example, if you're really hot, you sweat to maintain a stable 98.6 Fahrenheit body temperature. And of course, when you're very cold, you shiver. Those muscle contractions heat your body and maintain an internal temperature at the same.
Okay.
Explain this one, Ms. Metter.
A second example of homeostasis. Homeostasis doesn't just mean keeping temperature the same, but another important component is to keep your water level the same. So you may increase or decrease the volume of your urine in order to keep a constant water level.
Now, third characteristic for living things is metabolism. And most of us have heard about people who have a very fast metabolism, and no matter what they eat, they don't seem to gain any weight because they just burn up that food and lose it as body heat. And other people, they just look at a Big Mac and they gain weight. They have a very low metabolism. But what metabolism really is all about is getting and using energy.
If we look at the getting energy first, all living things have to have food. Some organisms, like these plants, can make their own food using water and carbon dioxide and energy from the sun. These organisms are called autotrophs, and they make their own food. Auto means self, troph means feeding. They are self-feeders. They don't have to have any other organisms to get their food.
So really, it's another word for saying these organisms are producers. They produce their own food. Now, of course, other organisms are called heterotrophs. Hetero means other, so troph, feeder, and they are organisms like us that have to get their energy by eating or absorbing food. The squirrel is obviously eating food. Mushrooms are more interesting. A lot of people think of them as like plants making their own food, but they don't. They are heterotrophs. They have to literally absorb their energy from nutrients that are found in the soil or a log that they happen to be breaking down or some other organism.
Okay, so that's the food part of it, the getting, but then once you got your food, you have to get the energy out of it. And all organisms, whether they're autotrophs or heterotrophs, must release the energy from their food. And this process is called cellular respiration, and it requires oxygen. Just like getting the energy out of wood when you burn it, you have to have oxygen to get that energy out, to get the fire going. Well, to get the energy out of your food, it also takes oxygen.
Now, another characteristic of life is the life cycle. And some authors lump these characteristics in different ways, but for a life cycle, most of you are familiar with an insect life cycle. An egg hatches and the young larva comes out, eats all my tomatoes, and then matures into a large larva, which then pupates, and after pupation develops, emerges, I should say, as the adult. Frogs go through a similar type of thing, except they go through the tadpole stage and eventually into the adult frog stage. What's more interesting is that in creatures like a jellyfish, which we know as creatures that are mobile, they can move around, the egg develops into a larva that actually plants itself on some type of hard substrate, like a coral reef, and becomes sessile or immobile for a while, and then develops later into another stage, which actually is mobile and eventually develops into the full-grown, I should say, jellyfish.
So this life cycle includes reproduction. We all come from reproduction, even if we don't have kids of our own. It also includes growth and development. Growth, of course, is just getting bigger. Development is changing as you get bigger. So in humans, if we just grew and didn't develop, we'd look like giant cupies.
Ah!
And of course, death is a part of that life cycle as well. We don't always think of plants as having a life cycle, but they definitely do. We can start with a flower, and the purpose of the flower is for sex. And yes, sexual
Plants.
reproduction, yes, in plants. And when the egg and the sperm join together to make an embryo, that embryo is inside a seed, which is inside of a fruit. So we have the fruit, there's the pointer, the fruit and the seed coming out of that fruit. And that seed, of course, can grow into a whole new adult plant that can flower and start the cycle over again.
A fifth characteristic, the final one that we have on our list, is the hereditary material. And most of you recognize this double helix twisted ladder shape as a DNA molecule, which is the hereditary material for all known living things. DNA, or hereditary material, is what determines our traits, and one of those traits is hair color.
Differences in DNA can lead to adaptations. Mr. Miller's DNA is different from mine. We have different traits, and the same is true for these bunnies. And one difference in their DNA has determined what their coat color is, their fur color. And this white rabbit blends in really well with the snow in the background, whereas this brown bunny does not. And we would say that the white bunny is better adapted to its environment. This is a genetically controlled trait. It's not just something they can get used to being in the snow, but it is due to their DNA.
Exactly. So all living things have to have that hereditary material to control their traits.
In this presentation, we've had 2 C's, 2 H's, and 1 M. Mr. Miller, what are the C's?
Let's see. Hey, get it? Let's see. So, like 5 fingers on my hand, there were cells and cycles, heredity and homeostasis, and metabolism. And those are the 5 characteristics that we're going to use as not only as we go forward in this unit, but really as we teach the rest of this school year.
Okay, that's the characteristics of life for our video, but we have a couple questions that we would like for you to answer in your notes. And the first one is, which characteristic of life did these pictures illustrate?